Okay guys, we're getting very close to our semester exams. I hope we're studying a little every night. This video 1 through 7 is focusing on those fraction problems. This video is a little long because there are multiple step problems, but I hope it helps with remembering what to do with the fractions and adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Please let me know if you have any questions after watching the video. Okay, number 1. Ginley and Sarah decide to make a pancake breakfast for 6 people. They found a recipe that will make 12 silver dollar pancakes, so that's important. It only makes 12 per batch, but they need to make 30 silver dollar pancakes for 5 per person. How much of each ingredient? Just remember, your test is going to be multiple choice, so you're really not going to have to find every single ingredient for an answer choice. Maybe it'll be just for one. But the way I think of this is if I know the batch, one batch equals 12, but I need 30, so 2 batches would equal 24, but I need 6 more. So if you think, well, what's half of a batch? Half of a batch would be the 6, so 2.5 batches would make 30 total. Okay, so I have to think I am making this recipe 2.5 times. So you can either multiply these or write each one and figure out how much 2.5 is, but I'm going to multiply. So we have 1 1/4, this is for flour, times the 2.5. So first thing I'm going to do is make these to improper fractions. So we know that we have to do 1 times 4 is 4, plus that one on top makes 5. So this is really 5/4, times, do the same thing, 2 times 2 is 4, plus that one is 5. So we have 5 halves, and if you multiply that straight across, you'll get 25/8. And if you simplify that, that would be 3 1/8. So I would need 3 1/8 cups of flour. So this is for flour. Next we have 1 egg. So you would have to think you'd have to do 1 times 2.5, which would be 2.5. You really can't have 2.5 eggs. So you could say use 3 eggs, which is approximately 3 eggs. Next you have 3 teaspoons of baking. So you could do 3 times, and I would just go ahead and do the 5/2, which is 2.5. So you get 15/2, because remember we need to put this 3/1, multiply straight across, which would give us 7.5 teaspoons. Okay, and same thing for 1.5 sugar. I'm kind of running out of room, but you could do 1.5, multiply that by the 2.5, which you would actually have to change both of them. So 1 times 2 is 2, plus, so this would be 3 halves times 5 halves, which will give you 15/4, which would be 3.5 or 2/4. Same thing for teaspoons of salt. So this one was for sugar. Next, teaspoons, you have 1/2 times the 2.5. So you might want to change this to 5. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 5 halves to make this easier. So this would be 5/4 or 1 1/4, which would be half of 2.5. And you would just do this for every single one. Remember, you're not going to have to do every single one on your test. There may be a question about for one. For example, for like how many cups of flour would you need? Or how many teaspoons of salt? Not for every single one. So remember, it's just practice to try each of them. But there is most of them for you. Okay, so Paul has 3/5 a roll of speaker wire left, and his sister uses 1/4 of it to set up speakers in her room. It says, how much of the whole roll of speaker wire did Paul's sisters use? Well, when I'm reading this question and I think, oh, she's using 1/4, so it's kind of breaking it into fourths. And when you're breaking something further down into fourths, it's actually multiplying by that. So we have 3/5 times 1/4, which will give me 3/20. Remember, if you're not sure about something, always draw a model. A model helps. Sorry, my lines are not perfect here. if you think about, she has 3/5. Let's see if I can draw this. Okay, 3/5. He only has this amount. And then they're breaking that, she only used 1/4 of that. So we know it has to be smaller than the 3/5. So if you think 3/5 and 4, the way to break that up to actually get 20ths is to think about breaking this into 4ths each. So because it says of the whole thing, so but she is only getting 1/4 of that. So 1/4 of the 20 of the 3 she has, so she gets 1/4 from here, 1/4 from this one, and 1/4 from that one, which gives us, if you count every single one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, that gives us the 3/20ths right there. So that's where the 3/20ths come from, and why we would pick 3/20ths. And it says what fraction of the whole roll is left. Well, if you think of this, he had 3/5, which we can tell now is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He had 12/20ths. We are taking away 3/20ths, which would leave us with 9/20ths that he has left over. Or you could think of it as 3/5 minus 3/20ths, and you would just have to find the common denominator. Remember, when you're subtracting or adding fractions, you must have that common denominator. Okay, let's look at number 3. It says 3 groups of students are sharing leftover pizza that was all the original size to begin with. And in which group does each student get the most pizza? Explain your choice. So there's 2 ways you can work this. You can work this out mathematically, or you can work this out visually and get the same answer. So I'm going to start with working it out visually. So in this problem, it says 6 students equally share 3/4 of a pizza. So the first thing I think is that I need to break this into 4 slices because that's how much was there. But now they only have 3 of the 4 slices of pizza left over. And they're sharing it with 6 people. And I noticed that if I cut this in half, that this right here shows me the 6 slices that they are equally sharing. So I can tell that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slices total. So I have 8 slices total, but they only get 1 of the 8 because there are 6 students. They don't get 6 of the 8 because you have to remember they want to know how much for each student. Okay, mathematically this looks like saying that I had 3/4 and I divided it among 6 students. But we've talked about that we don't divide. I mean, you can divide with fractions. You'd have to find a common denominator. But we recommend that you actually just multiply and use the reciprocal. So we are going to multiply by the reciprocal. So we have 3/4 times the reciprocal of 6 over 1 would be 1/6. And then we multiply straight across and we get 3/24, which we know simplifies down to 1/8. Okay, now we have the next problem. So I made another pizza. This time the 3 students are equally sharing 1/3 of the pizza. So this time I'm going to break the pizza into thirds, but they only have 1 of the 3. And then I see that I need 3 slices to share. So I'm going to cut this into 3 slices. And notice I'm cutting the entire pizza. So, and now if I'm thinking for each student, this would be what 1 student gets. So that's 1 out of the total of slices, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 total slices. So that is 1/9. So I'm going to say these 3 get 1/9. And once again, mathematically, you would say I would have 1/3 divided among 3 students. We are going to change this to multiplication by the reciprocal, which gives me 1/9. Okay, and lastly, we have 4 students are sharing 2/3 of a pizza. So I'm going to go ahead and just work this one out mathematically since I'm running out of room here. So I have 2/3 of a pizza divided among 4 students. I can rewrite that as 2/3 times 1/4, which equals 2/12, which simplifies to 1/6. Now I have to look at which one of these represents the greatest slice. Well, 1/6 is greater because there's only 6 slices and they get 1 of the 6. Where if you're looking at 1/9, there are 9 slices, you only get 1. And on this one, there are 8 slices and you only get 1. So that means these slices are smaller because it's cut up into smaller pieces, where 1/6 is actually greater. So your final answer should be this last one down here. Okay, moving on to number 4. I know these fraction ones are long because there's multiple parts to them. Remember, this is a multiple choice test, so there will not be multiple parts. Just make sure you understand how to do each type of problem these are asking. Several students asked this problem in my class, so I'm going to go very detailed on this one to make sure we fully understand. So Sammy's mother has 2.5 pounds of blueberries that she bought on Monday. Sammy ate 1/4 of the blueberries before he went to bed. How many pounds of the blueberries did Sammy eat? So when you're thinking about this, first thing, if you are eliminating answers, you should know that if he ate some, that the answer has to be less than 2.5 pounds. So eliminate any fractions that would be greater. So the way I see this is that I would think that I have 2.5 times 1/4, because if you're multiplying by 1/4, that is the same thing as dividing it into 4 sections. But remember we talked about that when we multiply fractions by changing them to improper, just because it makes it easier. If not, you have to break it down into 2 times 1/4 and then 1/4 times 1/2. So we would do 2 times 2 right here, which makes 4, plus that 1 makes 5. So we have 5/2 times 1/4, which would give me 5/8. So he ate 5/8 on Monday. And then it says how many are left over. So left over means to subtract. So if we're thinking about this, it's like 2.5 minus 5/8. Once again, remember when we're subtracting, we have to have that common denominator. And I also recommend changing them into impropers. So we know we had 5/2 over here, so let's step back for a second. So let's change 2.5 to 5/2 minus the 5/8. But now we have to have a common denominator, which could be 8. So I'm going to times this by 4 and times this by 4. So I have 28 minus 5/8, which would give me 15/8. And if you simplify that, that would give me 1 7/8 left over. Next, it says on Tuesday he ate 1/3 of the blueberries that were left over. So once again, you're thinking about 1/3 of, so we're going to multiply this again, because remember that 1/3 of something, multiplication is the same thing as dividing into 3, which is what we should be thinking of. So we have 1 7/8 times 1/3. So we're going to want to change this to an improper again, which we already have up there. So that would be 15/8 times 1/3, which would give me 15/24, which if you simplify that, divide by 3/3, which will give me 5/8. And then it just asked, did Sammy eat more blueberries Monday or Tuesday? He ate the same amount both days. And explain your reasoning. Well, you have both fractions, and 5/8 and 5/8 represents the same amount. Okay, now to some quicker problems. It says compare each pair of fractions using benchmark fractions. Insert the less than, greater than, or equal to sign. Explain your reasoning. So if we look at 4/5, 4/5 is really close to being a whole, so it's close to a whole. And then you have 7/15, and that's going to be close to a half. And the way I look at this, that some people struggle with, is I'm looking at the denominator. Half of the denominator is 2.5, and this is way more than 2.5. And it's only 1 away from being a whole, so that's why it's close to a whole. Where if I think of 15, half of 15 is going to be 7.5, so 7 would be close to half. So I know that 4/5 is greater than 7/15. And then we have 5/10 and 8/16. So if you think about 5/10, 5 is half of 10, so this is the same thing as a half. And 8 is half of 16, so that's the same thing as a half. So these are actually equal to one another because they both represent a half. Now let's look at number 7. You have 4/8 and 7/14. So if you think of 4/8 is close to a half, it actually is exactly a half. And 7/14 is also exactly a half, so these are also equal. So that takes us from 1 through 7. I know this video was long, those fractions, ones with multiple steps, but I really wanted you to understand what I'm doing and what is expected. So let's do a quick rundown. I'm going to go to another slide and just a quick refresher over fraction operations. Okay, little fraction reminder, adding or subtracting, you have to have common denominators, have to be able to work the problems out. Multiplying, you can multiply straight across. So 1/4 times 1/4 can give you 1/16. That is okay. Dividing, remember to multiply by the reciprocal. So if I had 2/3 divided by 1/8, I would say that this is 2/3 times 8/1. So the reciprocal is the opposite of this fraction. It's what can I multiply that by to get to 1. So please remember those important things about fraction operations.